Councilor Rodriguez, and myself, Councilor Azak. Councilor Minicello will not be able to attend this evening as he has a work commitment. With that, Madam Clerk, item number 1.
Ordinance. An ordinance amending Article 3, General Regulations and Permitted Modifications of the city's zoning ordinances to establish restrictions for portable storage containers in residential, commercial, and industrial zones. Invited to attend, Mark D'Agostino, Ward 3 Councilor, Susan J. Nicastro, Ward 4 Councilor, Winthrop Farrell Jr., Councilor at Large, Rob May, Director of Planning and Economic Development, Deputy Chief Edward R. Williams Jr., James Plouffe, Inspector of Buildings, Assistant City Solicitor Aileen Bartlett, or designee of the Law Department.
Thank you. Councilor D'Agostino, did you want to speak on this?
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to join you again on this. Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, there's just a couple of minor housekeeping items that, we wanted to just go back into and make sure that this is done as tight as possible. So let's have a conversation and want to get it right,
Sure. So, Councilor Rodriguez, I believe you had this sent back here to the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair. What I wanted to do is to make sure that we were clear that, since we're going to put something in the books that we haven't quite had before, that I wanted to make sure that, and I think Deputy Chief has some concerns as well, at least shares the same concerns as I have of some things that we wanted to add to the ordinance. Again, I'm not against the ordinance. I want to make sure it goes in, but I wanted to kind of add a few more things to it so it's nice and clear, because we don't want to get phone calls as soon as this thing passes about, well, I didn't know this, I didn't say that. Right. So that's what I wanted to make sure that, perhaps if we want to, through the chair, if we can hear from Deputy
Chief Williams. Sure. Deputy Chief, did you want to speak on some of the changes?
So from what I understand, one of the council's concerns was not to be able to put these in the front yard and have them kind of out of sight. And the ordinance does say placement of storage containers on the premises must comply with all accessory setback requirements for a residential zone. And I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means, and maybe Mr. Plouffe could fill us in.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, councilors.
Good evening.
Good evening. The setbacks of the accessory structures are 5 feet from the sides and rear of the property, and then 30 feet or the setback of the main structure in the front. So these would not be allowed in the front yard if they were held to this standard.
Yeah, but see, Madam Chair, one of the concerns that I have, for instance, where I live on Summer Street, I've got about 150 feet of frontage in my property. I didn't want to see, 10 containers in a property like mine just sitting there like it's a garage, or a warehouse. And that's what we're trying to get away from, because I have received a bunch of calls with people with concerns about these structures being in the front lawns, blocking the views of some of the residents in the city, blocking the views from drivers who are making turns in and out of places in the sense because of the placement of these containers. And I wanted us to be very clear with adding a point here that says these containers will not be placed in your front lawn. Basically as clear can be, so that there's no ambiguity, there's no, well, it's not really in the front, it's kind of on the side. These shall not be in the front lawns of properties. You're going to put them in your backyard if you must, and it needs to be in the backyard and away from being an eyesore to the neighborhood or to the neighbors who do not have one. If it's sitting in the backyard, then I won't have a problem with it the way it is. But to basically completely say these will not be in the front lawns.
So that may be a question to our legislative counsel. Attorney Resnick, is that something that we can state in there, just saying that it can't be in the front?
Yep, this is zoning, so you can put that in there. But,
We're kind of talking about some possible language, and the commissioner was suggesting that we put language in that says it cannot be visible from the front plane of the house, I believe was the,
Yeah, I would suggest maybe not, it cannot be situated in front of the front plane of the house.
Okay.
So that if your house was, say, 45 feet back, your container would have to be a minimum of 45 feet back. If your property was close to the property line, say 10 feet from the property line, it would still have to be within, you could say the front plane or front setback requirement of the zone.
that would be better.
So that if your house was 10 feet from the property line in the front, you would have to maintain the property line of the setback requirement of that zone. So typically, R1C would be 30 feet.
Yeah, so we can definitely either add it to D or create a whole line to itself, to basically state that, because that is the main concern that I actually had with this, is that it's not clear enough. Yeah, it does talk about we're going to comply with residential zoning laws and all that other stuff, but nobody knows what that is. But if we're clear about it's not going to be on your front lawn, then we know that it's very clear that it's not going to be on your front lawn.
And I would suggest in, Council to the Chair, the council could possibly word that in a way through that, through amending the already enumerated section instead of adding a new one, just to keep that, no conflicts from occurring. So if someone said that it was to meet the accessory structure, but then also later on says has to be back, that conflicts. So we want to make sure that we amend that one as opposed to add a new one.
Right. Yeah, because I think if it's nice and clear, then there's no somebody having to call your office for clarification on what that zone, residential zoning states. When it says not in the front, everybody knows what that means. Or not to the plane of the building, everybody knows what that means. I think it needs to be, very clear so we understand, and that's the only major issue I had with this when it first came through.
With that, it could still potentially, depending on the size of one side yard, could end up in a side yard if they have enough land. But, a lot of the houses in our city don't have that kind of side land anyway, but,
As long, through the chair, as long as it's not, my whole concern was the fact that neighbors alongside of where these containers are located are complaining about, why is that single family having 2 or 3 containers in front of their building? I thought their houses were that house, but it looks like they've got additional compartments of their homes on their front lawn. And that's what we're trying to get away from, and that if it's in the backyard somewhere, then it's perfectly fine. But it needs to be kept because, we've got a major issue with the cleaning lists in the city, and we try to clean this city up. And we heard that throughout the campaign, everywhere we went to, that's all people talked about, how dirty the city is. And sometimes there is things that look somewhat lawless, people doing whatever the hell they want to do. And that's what we're trying to avoid and try to get to a point where, yes, we want to work with you, but we also have a vested interest in making sure that our city it looks decent to the eye, and that we're all basically doing what we should be doing to make sure the property values of our neighbors aren't going down the tube because I decide to make my, my house or my yard into a junkyard.
right. Closer to the street than the front plane of the house.
So what has been suggested here is to add to item D under parentheses 1 of section 2. It would read, must comply with all accessory setback requirements for rear and side setbacks, and must comply with all front setbacks for a primary structure, so as not to be situated in front of the in the front plane of the house.
Yeah, that draft just basically says for the sides and rear, it's based off of the setbacks for accessory structures, but for the frontage, it's based off the primary dwelling setback.
Right.
You can get rid of the plane aspect of it because it won't be in the front of the house, of the primary dwelling. just by virtue of it not being able to be situated that close to the frontage.
I see what you're saying. It's kind of saying the same thing twice if
Yes.
you do that.
I would suggest, to the chair, that maybe that we could say, as I took council's suggestion here, must comply with all accessory setback requirements for rear and side setbacks, and must comply with all front setbacks for a primary structure, and no further forward than the plane of the house. Because we're talking about a lot of existing houses that don't meet the front setback anyways. Or we're also talking about houses that are meeting the setback but are further back than is required. You don't want them to be able to put that forward of the house, but still meet the front setback.
I mean, through the chair again, I mean, we had one not too far from where I live, that was actually sitting, a portion of it was sitting on the sidewalk of the city. You know? And that's what we need to kind of get away from. So basically, I think we need to be a little more clear at saying, you're not going to put this in the front of your house, period.
No further, what is it? No further.
No further forward than the front plane of
Than
the
the
house.
front plane of the house, right.
So that if you had a house back here.
Counselor Rodriguez, I think the proposal would have that effect because the frontage setback for a primary structure is substantially greater than one for the setbacks on
But
the,
Counselor, I'm just looking at the language itself. I mean, sometimes when we play with words to make it sound somewhat cute and more lawyery-like, I think we get away from the fact, well, it's the plane of the house, and is it, you're looking at it this way, you're looking at it that way. My whole thing is not in front of your structure. You cannot put this in the residential zone in front of your house, period.
That's kind of layman's terms, right?
Yeah.
So I think what's important, Counsel, I know our attorneys gave some language. I think what's important is we want something that's enforceable, that that you'll be able to, that your guys will be able to enforce, that the inspectors will be able to enforce. So I think that's what's important, make sure that the language is good. I mean, we're going to ask for your expertise in reading it, if you think that's something that enforceable and won't,
Madam Chair, I do believe it is enforceable. But I would also suggest that if we want to change the word plane to the edge, the word edge,
The what, edge?
yeah, the front edge of the house.
Just to give it layman's terms.
Yeah, the word front is there, so I think automatically people will see that it says front.
We
you
want
know?
to write it in such a way that it's legally enforceable, but also something that regular people can read and understand and say, okay, I can't do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Mr. Plouffe has a very good point where the setback of the property could be 30 feet, but like your house, it's back 150 feet. So you want to use that front plane of the house as a marker that it can't be anywhere in front of that front plane of the house.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Counselor Nacastro, did you want to speak on the matter?
I think Wynn wanted to say something.
Okay, I also will open up to did you have a question, Counselor Fowler?
Well, just a couple of observations, because I want to make sure I have this down right. As currently written, you could have, focusing on residential zones, you could have 3 storage containers for a 90-day period, renewable for another 90 days.
Correct.
Okay. The one thing that I want to point out is that somebody's backyard could be the line of sight from somebody's front yard in front of their house. And if I live in an area where, for whatever reason, I'm on one street and there's another house on a street that's perpendicular, I'm not so sure in a residential area, and this goes to the question of what quality of life do we want for residents. Do I want to look out at 3 of these things, these pods?
They're right there.
I mean, I don't know. I would not want to do that, and if we pass this as written, we're sanctioning that you can have 3 for literally half a year, 90 days and 90 days. The other thing that we don't have here, which bothers me, is there is nothing on the contents of the storage container. Now, I hate to admit it, I had bird feed in the garage. A mouse got in, more mice got in. Thank God for Burgess Pest Control, that's not an endorsement. But depending upon what people store in these containers, could be a real problem in the city. And we're not addressing that at all. There's no prohibition in here about flammable liquids, pardon me, notice about flammable liquids. There's no notice about garbage, which could attract vermin. So in an emergency, I definitely think people should be able to have an auxiliary structure to store clothing, or God forbid if they had a fire or something. But I'm not sure we want to go with 3 for a 90-day and then a 90-day period without any restrictions on what can be stored. And there is going to be a responsibility to enforce this. And frankly, folks, I know this is in the front of the ad. Do we want these all over the city? That's the issue that we're going to have to face tonight. Temporarily, I got no problem with it in someone's backyard. But please remember, someone's backyard could be the line of sight for a guy or a woman or a couple that has a nice house, a pool, and they're going to be looking at, for half a year, they're going to be looking at these pods. And maybe it's just a personal preference. I don't particularly care for them. And I am worried about the contents, but thank you, Madam Chair.
As soon as they wrap up, Counselor, did you want to speak on what they're discussing right now on the language, or?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Counselor Nacastro. Okay.
Pause for 2 minutes. Pause for 2 minutes.
Sure. Should we take a 2-minute recess?
Madam Chair, I have a question that may fill the time.
Counselor Riley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for just about anybody. These things aren't exactly wheeled in on a dolly. You don't put that in yourself. What do we do for the properties that may find themselves in a position where they temporarily need a storage container, like a pods container, and can't get it in their backyard?
That was going to be my, through the chair also, that was going to be one of my comments also. A lot of times these pods are for moving.
Right.
So if you're going to be moving your house, you need more than one, depending on the size of your house. But I agree, the 6 month, the 90 days and the 90 days of the 6 months, it's just a little bit too much. But I would say if we could reduce the time, 30 days with a renewable for 30 days, that would be, more appropriate for people that are moving their house. And it would keep people from putting them in there and then saying at the end, well, it's been here for so long.
Yeah, renewable definitely makes sense. Putting in that's something they could, if they need to, get it again, but they have to go and get it. But as we consider, the sightliness of it, which is a very good point, is quite a lot of people taking advantage of the absence of this kind of an ordinance already. My thought is just, what happens if you need them and you can't get them in your backyard? What do we do with you?
I do agree with that. I mean, they come on 4-wheeled vehicles where they lift them up, drive them over, and they drop them. They put the vehicle back on their truck.
I'm just thinking, I don't quite know if I could get one in my backyard.
Right.
So, and most of my ward is Campanelli's, so if we can't get it through ours,
Keep it for 90 years though?
I don't know.
Counselors, I think this discussion, can we take a 2-minute recess to?
Yep.
So we're going to go into a 2-minute recess. Okay, we're back from recess. Counselor Nacastro, you have the...
Thank you. Susan Nicastro, representing Ward 4. And I've passed out to you before the recess some photographs. These are photographs from 3 different residential properties in lovely Ward 4. Okay? There are people with they're like commercial trailers in their backyard, full of stuff, I don't know what. And these are residential dwellings, and so I'm a co-sponsor of this ordinance. I helped to draft it, and I feel very strongly that that our community is being taken advantage of by the lack of regulation of these kinds of structures, these containers. I totally get people need this when they're moving, when something's going on in their families or their lives, when they're remodeling their homes, but it can't take forever. There has to be a limit on it. There has to be some kind of enforcement of that limit. And I think we need to know where they are. They need to fill out an application. I mean, this is just over the top. I mean, look at these pictures. These were taken all on one street in Ward 4. And when you drive around Ward 4, which I did this afternoon preparing for this hearing, and it's only one ward out of 7, we have quite a few of these structures without regulation. I strongly support this. I think they have, you've got to cover not just the front yard, you've got to cover the side areas and the rear. I have houses in Ward 4 that I've gotten calls about rodents because the backyard was being used as a staging and storage area. Stuff was there for months at a time. In some instances, there are people that put their trash in these structures and just let it accumulate there. I don't know why, but I know that we can't have that. The point is well taken about people who have houses behind them. We're a well-settled community. There's a lot of houses that have houses behind them, and we have to respect the quality of life of the people behind these dwellings as well as on the sides and across the street. I urge you to work with us in getting something approved by this committee tonight because we need this going forward. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I know Councilor Fowler had a question. I wasn't sure if it was for you, Councilor.
No, actually, it was an observation to all of you that, and I mentioned at the Legislative Council, we need to put into the ordinance that when a permit is issued, it will be displayed visibly so that the enforcement personnel can see it,
Sure.
and it shall have the expiration date on it.
That's a
Because
good
otherwise,
idea.
you'll drive around and you would have no idea
That's right.
when was the permit issued, when does it expire, and I really think that's important to do, not only as a reminder to the homeowner, but for our enforcement personnel.
Thank you. I'll let the technical experts come back to the podium, and I
Thank you,
reserve the
Counselor.
right to throw more 2 cents in. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Resnick, did you get that change?
Yeah.
No, we don't. Also, there's a couple of questions. I don't think we put in fines to what the fine would be if somebody was to not follow this ordinance.
Yep, there's a $300 fine.
There's a $300 fine?
Yeah, I thought we had a fine in here.
Oh, I thought it says 2, so it's 3?
Maybe it's 2.
Okay.
It is 3?
I thought it was 3.
It says 2, but
My copy's cut off right now.
Mine
Okay, it says 200.
it says 2, but if it should be 3, then I think 3 is more
Yeah.
reasonable. What it should be, maybe that way they're not repeat offenders, because I also, and I brought this up in the beginning, these structures are going up, residents aren't paying taxes on them, whereas if they had a garage or a certain size shed, that would be in their taxes. So a lot of them find it's much cheaper to get these containers on their properties than to build an actual structure. So we definitely, I think 300 is should be the fine.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Fowler.
just to move it along, I had a couple of amendments that I wanted to see if we could get voted on.
Okay.
Under residential zones, item B, the permit shall be for an initial period. I would strike 90 days and say 45 days, and then the permit may be extended one time for an additional period not to exceed 30 days.
Not to exceed 30. And this
That would
is,
be a total of
that's in the form of a motion?
the form of a
Okay.
motion.
Second.
So you'd have a 75-day period. Now, if someone wants to ask to add under extraordinary circumstances, another 30 days could be granted. I have no objection, but I think if we give the public notice, listen, you've got 75 days to get done what you have to get done, I think we'll be well served by that type of requirement.
Okay, an amendment's been, motion's been made to amend. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The amendment carries. Did you have another amendment, Counselor, or was that it?
Well, I think Legislative Counsel is working on the one about displaying the permit. When a permit is issued, it shall be prominently displayed by the homeowner and visible to inspectional personnel, and shall contain the expiration date of the permit. I hope I didn't talk too fast on that.
Nope, but I can pick it up on the audio, so that's,
Okay.
can be a
Thank
form
you.
of a motion.
Thank you,
That's a
Madam.
form of a motion?
Yes.
Go ahead. I'll second that.
Is there a
so we can
second?
discuss it.
Okay. All those in favor of
Hold on,
this?
on the motion for a
Okay.
second. Now, this is going to go for both residential and commercial.
Oh, yes.
So I think it needed to be placed somewhere before
Before the,
it breaks,
Yeah.
it breaks up.
yeah, right, I would suggest it above the fine section.
Right, I don't have that, so-
All right, I think I'm missing a bit. Oh, right there.
So we have a motion, it was properly seconded. Did you want to see this before you vote on it?
No, I'm just saying it's
Just
going to
gonna
go,
place it right there.
it's going to go before the fine.
Yes. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The amendment carries.
And I have one more.
Counselor Fowler?
The last one is that the building department shall provide a list of, trying to think how to word that, shall provide a list of materials that are not to be stored in a container. And I'm not being funny, but I don't want live animals stored. I don't want somebody to have a pod and then use it for a kennel or something like that, but I might have to have legislative counsel help out with the legal wording of this. So if the building department's going to issue the permit and collect the fee, then I think the building commissioner should tell the applicant, this is what you may store, this is what you may not store. He can certainly collaborate with the fire department on that, and I do think that we should say no live animals to be housed.
Combustible, okay. Or hazardous waste. So on that, Counselor, I just have a question to our superintendent of buildings. So now this commissioner, this takes it enforcement a step further. So will the inspectors actually be opening up and looking into these whatever the parcels, these containers, yeah?
That makes, we could require, because it's going to be permitted, to inspect it.
Okay,
Once it's closed, after we've inspected it, I believe we should be able to have, and I'm wondering if this is something that has to be written in there, but we should have retain right to inspect during the permit time.
that's something that I believe should be in there. So do we need to have that be part of the amendment, an amendment, Counsel?
Yep.
Okay. Because you definitely want, I mean, I could see where somebody might not want us, once, they have the permit, not want us to go in there. So we want to make sure that our inspectors would be able to have access.
Yes, and I would also, if I may make a suggestion, when we mentioned talking about no live animals, but we should probably, if we're going to be delineate that no habitation,
I agree,
no sleeping, no use of
I
it.
agree.
Madam Chair.
Well, listen, sure. Attorney Resnick, you got all that?
Yep.
Counselor D'Agostino?
Just one more suggestion that the commissioner and I were talking about. Might be wise to add language in when we're talking about the permit can be extended for 30 days. So that's a total of 75 days. Do we want to add something in that says, and for a max of 75 days in any one calendar year, so that we don't have a situation where, to the commissioner's point, someone says, okay, well, I went my 75 days, I got rid of it for a month, and now I'm getting it back. Just a thought.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Counselors?
Okay, let me think about that. So could someone apply on November 1st
Maybe 12-month period?
within a 12, in other words, 75 days within a 12-month period,
That might be the better way to go.
commencing with the date of the original permit?
Yeah. That might be the better way to go, because you're right. If someone does it in November, now it kicks out to the next year, right,
They claim the clock reset.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
No? Okay. Do we need these all need to vote on them as amendments, Attorney Resnick?
Yep, so for Counselor Farwell's, it's going to include that the building department shall provide a list of materials not to be stored in the container, and those which can be stored in the container, which not to be included live animals, hazardous materials, combustible materials, and to preclude habitation. And also to include that the building inspector shall have the right to inspect the containers for compliance of the permit. And if you want to do an exclusion on a 12-month period, I can add that in too.
That sounds,
So move for those.
Okay.
Second.
all those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? Amendment carries. Any other thoughts?
Yes, Madam Chair, one further thought that the council and I were discussing, and this goes to what Councilor Rodriguez was mentioning earlier. We probably could put in there that these pods or these containers can only be on paved surfaces,
Forgot about that.
as opposed to on grass or in backyards or side yards. It would have to be on a paved surface. Just a thought.
Well,
That would
that's,
preclude them from being in the front yard, being on the side yard.
so that kind of changes everything, because
Yeah.
how many people have paved backyards?
Right.
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Counselor Lally?
my instant first thought is, okay, so you're putting it in the
That's what
driveway.
we had to-
Right.
If I may, I think part of, and I apologize, I should have relayed this when I spoke a minute ago, what we were thinking is if we're going to have the limitations on how long they can be there, right, and the idea is temporary, maybe you're doing some work to the house, maybe you're moving and packing up, do we need to address the frontage issue when you can only have the thing for a limited period of time, and then would we want to replace that with the requirement it be on paved? So you can put it in your driveway,
Yeah.
pack up and leave, or do whatever it is, maybe, again, like you're storing some stuff for some renovations, you're done, then it goes away anyway, but because of the short term, is that still even a consideration now, or are we kind of
I still don't want it blocking the streets.
stepping over
Counselor Lally,
ourselves?
you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, especially if we're really going to establish that it's a short-term practice and we're going to be really tough on the amount of time they can be on the property, I think I don't think I'd have too much of a problem with somebody leaving it in their driveway for 30 days.
Right.
Especially when it comes to, accessibility issues to their back or side yard. I don't know where my colleagues are at with it, but I don't think, if we're really going to make this, I think the biggest issue is we have people leaving these here for a very long time. If we make it if we really make it a time-sensitive item, I don't think that's, as much of a problem. And seeing as we've already been pushing for, things to be on, pavement anyway, permeable, non-permeable's been a discussion for the ordinance committee and for the council for a while. Some kind of, requirement that it remain on a paved surface, and we basically just make them leave it in their driveway for 45 days. That allows us, it's very accessible for the building, for the inspectors to invoke their, right to check it out. And it's very visible, so we can tell on day 46 whether or not you've gotten rid of it. That's just off the top of my head, my thoughts on it. I think we're, if we're going to actually really hold them to any kind of time, I don't think making sure it's not visible from the street is as urgent an issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Well, that changes a lot of things. The pictures that Counselor Nicastro showed us, they're all on pavement. So that's It's interesting.
Madam Chair.
Counselor Bauer.
Just a question for Mr. Plouffe, and I'm not trying to add to your work burden, but if we had a provision that at the discretion of the building commissioner, for a 30-day period, someone could have a storage container in their driveway, in other words, you would then ask, why are you doing this? Why can't you have it in the backyard? In other words, you'd be the gatekeeper for where this is going to be located. Would that be a problem for you to
No.
have that discretion?
Not at all, Council. That would not be a problem for us to ask those questions and just follow up and make sure that they're following the rules. No problem whatsoever.
That's something that would be reasonable? No, well, I mean, that would take a motion to add the provision that at the discretion of the building commissioner, an applicant may place a storage container in the driveway for a period of 30 days?
Ooh, through the chair.
Okay, so, Counselor, just one thing. So that changes, I mean, not too many people have paving in their backyard, so that's going to cause us an issue, so how are we going to? Counselor Lally?
Shouldn't it be the language, if we choose to pursue that, I think it should be for the length of the permit. Because if you're allowed a 45-day initial run, but the last 15 days, you gotta move the storage unit, like that would.
Yeah, I mean, you know your ward well, that's fine. At your discretion, based on the applicant's representations to you, you could allow them to have it for 45 days, or for the length of the permit, that could be in their driveway. Is that something that you would find reasonable and proper?
Yes, I do.
So you agree with that? So do you have a motion, Counselor, or did you want to speak on it, Counselor Rodriguez?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I mean, the whole basis of the objection to this thing from the get-go was for aesthetic purposes.
Yeah.
So if we're taking aesthetics out of it, where now we're going to allow somebody to be, have these things as ugly as they are in their front lawn for 60 days, 90 days, and then they're going to go to court and do, to me, it defeats the purpose of even bringing it back here to discuss unblocking the front of your house, because it's making your neighbor's house look kind of crappy. And that was the whole basis on this. It's not because, to make it easier for people on A, B, or C. It's just to get it out of your front lawn, because you're devaluing my property by putting this next to my house in your front lawn. So I still insist with, it not being in front of the house, it being in the backyard, whether it's paved, unpaved, or whatever the deal is. It's up to you, but not to be in front of the house, because the pictures that we have here, these things are sitting on driveways or on paved areas. So now we're going to have people go out and pave their whole front lawn so that they can put a container on top of, and then take us to court, because we're not going to be able to tell them what to do with their property and stuff, where we can kind of prevent this from happening, saying, you know what, we don't want these things in front of the houses, period. If you're going to put a storage container because you're moving or whatever, put it in your backyard. And if you have a situation where you don't really have a backyard, you know what? You need to kind of discuss what you're going to do with your situation ahead of time and decide what you're going to do. The whole premises of even bringing this thing back to the committee again to discuss was just to put that one-liner in there saying you're not going to put this thing in front of your house, because it's devaluing the properties and it's taking off the neighbors that don't have the ability to complain loudly. They complain it through us about it. So that's what we're trying to prevent. But if we're going to go and say they're going to be on the driveways, for 60 days, 90 days, or whatever the days might be, and then go to court and file whatever you're going to file, and then we're right back what we were and trying to prevent. So my goal was to get it from being in front of the house, so that we're not blocking the beautiful views that our neighbors have of their street.
So I just would like to comment, because this has gotten a lot bigger than
It doesn't, yeah.
we were hoping. I thought, it's not as easy as we were hoping it would be. But if you look at the pictures that Councilor Nacastro, and I know this is just a select few, because I've seen them for years throughout the city on the front lawns and everywhere, but these people aren't moving. They're hoarding. And this is, if you look at some of the stuff, like even with these containers, they still have stuff everywhere, all over the place. So I think we're going to have to draw the line somewhere and just enforce and find something that's enforceable to be able to fix this problem, because it's become a major problem, because it's not just one pod, it's multiple pods. So I think we have to start out with passing an ordinance that, Superintendent, you feel you can, your inspectors can enforce and get a start on this, because this is a big job.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Respond?
Councilor Farwell? did
Madam
you-
Chair, I agree with what Councilor Rodriguez said. The only caution I would remind us is that we live in an interesting city where I have a fairly large lot, but if you look at Ash Street, Boylston Street, Belmont Avenue, Green Street, Highland Street, if you have a fire in your home, there is no way that you're going to be able to put a storage container to save whatever you were able to save from that fire in a storage container unless it's in your driveway. Because we have what's called postage-size lots. There are some lots in the city that are only 6,000 square feet. They're 100 by 60. And I was concerned that we would leave someone who lived in a very modest home in a very small lot, who had a catastrophe, could be a fire just in a room, but they needed to store items while the house was being remodeled or repaired, and they wouldn't be able to do so unless we allowed the commissioner the discretion to say, you know what, under all those circumstances, we'll let you put it in the driveway.
And I think that's what I think we're all in accordance of that at the discretion of, the superintendent of buildings, that there are cases where somebody may have to, where they would come in and, if it's a case of a fire or some sort of emergency, then there's no other option, then I think we're all in agreement of
Okay.
that.
So
So,
that's-
did you want to speak on it,
As long as we allow that,
Superintendent?
Madam Chair, I'm
Yes, obviously, there's going to be emergencies and cases, as with everything, there's cases that, the ordinance would kind of, we can make you can make changes to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to make a suggestion then, after Councilor Rodriguez's comments, that since this is a zoning ordinance, if it was within the ordinance committee's discretion to make it a special permit for those certain circumstances, they can go in front of the zoning board of appeals and say, I need to put it in my driveway, as opposed to in the back. But if you want to leave it up to the discretion of the...
I think the discretion, councilors, of the superintendent of buildings is best, because, as we all know, to get before zoning and to get, by the time they get to a meeting, we're not trying to cause hardship to somebody who's already dealing with hardship. So the goal of this is really just to kind of clean up the city and to really, because this has totally gotten out of hand. I believe that's what my colleagues are trying to get to. Do we need to make any other amendments, Attorney Resnick?
Did you put at the discretion
Did we put at the discretion, we have to make a motion?
circumstances, at the discretion?
And then I just have a question on item 2, commercial and industrial zones.
Sure, so should we do the amendment to put at the discretion of the superintendent of
So-
buildings?
For placement of the container, we have it for residential zones, that it is to comply with all accessory setback requirements for the subject residential zones. Instead, we are going to do placement of the storage container, shall be at the discretion of the building inspector?
No, superintendent of buildings,
Okay.
right. Counselor, it's superintendent of building.
No, he's the commissioner.
We changed the
Yeah,
title,
the
didn't we?
committee.
Right, well, I don't know, he's listed here as our superintendent of buildings.
He's the commissioner of buildings.
What would you like?
We changed it to commissioner.
We changed this title
Right,
to
well,
commissioner.
our clerk's office did it, so, I'm just going by what your title is on our agenda, and no offense at all.
Just as a point of order, I think what we said is if the storage container could not be placed in the backyard, at the discretion of the building commissioner, it could be placed in the driveway. I don't think we were wiping out the original requirement.
Does that work?
I'm sorry, but I'm not too certain what your motion is. Are we
Okay.
going back to the original one with the setbacks being for rear
Yes.
and side? Then the frontage applies unless in the discretion of the commissioner.
Unless it cannot be put in the back,
Okay,
then it's up to the discretion of the commissioner of buildings
okay,
The placement.
for
Yeah.
placement of said container.
okay. Is that in the form of a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Motion's been made. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion passes.
Okay, now, finally, Madam Chair. Item 2, gentlemen, the commercial and industrial zones. Do we want 5 storage containers on the premises? Because a commercial lot might be, some could be large, some could be small. 5 could be overpowering on certain lots, especially if they border a residential area. And I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not hung up on spending all night here in this, but 5 is a lot. Again, I do think we should have prohibition against what's stored in them, even on a commercial or industrial lot. I do think we should still have the prohibition about having someone live in there or animals living in there. And I just wondered, I'm not going to offer a motion yet, I just wondered what your thoughts were on that before we jump ahead here.
Item D, I think, kind of addresses that. You can have 5 storage containers, however, they shall not be connected, and there shall be a minimum of 10 feet in between each unit. So if you've got a smaller lot and you've got to have 10 feet in between each unit, you may not be able to get 5 in there. And that's kind of why we had put that in, was to address that exact issue. Is it perfect? Is it going to address every situation? Probably not, but I think overall that 10 feet of distance should hopefully address the tiny, or as you put it, postage stamp lot with 5 of these crammed in there. They're not going to be able to do that if they have
All
to
right,
have 10 feet.
so for the sake of argument, across from the high school, the old Stop and Shop property, plenty of space, would you want to see 5 of those stacked there, 10 feet apart?
No, and that's, right. So how do we,
And the other thing, the other question I have, just gentlemen, just thinking out loud, should we put in here that the containers have to be attendant to the business on which they're located?
Right.
Because if I run a pizza shop, I might
I didn't even think of
I
that.
might pick up a few extra bucks by having some storage containers
Yeah.
on my property. So should we put something in there that that the containers must relate to the commercial property on which they're located?
Accessory to the primary use.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's happening where business owners are subleasing or whatever to somebody else, and they're putting these on their properties. In the meantime, the city gets no revenue, so no form of tax revenue on these, so.
How about screened? Council, how about screened from public view?
Yeah, should we add some language that forces the business to put them behind?
Yeah, I
To your
mean,
point about Stop and Shop.
Yeah, I think so. It's up to colleagues.
So,
Through the chair.
sure, did we are you all set, Councilor Farwell?
Yes,
Did you-
thank you, I'm sorry.
Okay, Councilor Lally?
I was just going to suggest going off of Councilor Farwell and off of our panel of experts. Why don't we copy or somewhat try and match the language we're using for residential properties? Where if you can screen it from, view, you can, go ahead. If you can't, you go to the commissioner for his discretion. That's what I would offer. Off of what you said, Councilor.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I just suggest too that we exempt a construction site? For instance, the new public safety building. you'll need more than 5 storage containers because the plumbers will have one, the electricians will have one, the pipe fitters will have one, the sheet metal people will have one. And I think that would be prudent to exempt construction sites to allow the contractors to allow their equipment and product to be safe.
Okay, we make it, do we need a motion, Attorney Resnick?
Yep.
Councilors? An amendment?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor? All those opposed? Carries. So I agree that 5 is a lot, but how, once again, I think that's, as long as it's up to the discretion of the commissioner, I think that works. Do we need, that's included in that, correct, Attorney Resnick?
No, so
That was in the law.
are we keeping the setback language that we use for the residential zone? We'll include that in 2F,
Yes,
and the same thing with the discretion?
yes.
Okay. So then, yes, you would need a motion on it, but
Commissioner, did you want to speak on it?
Yes, one thing, Madam Chair, in commercial zones, there are no setbacks unless it's abutting a residential zone. So putting language in there that meets the setbacks won't affect anything.
It won't affect anything, okay. Are we good?
Question?
Councilor Rodriguez?
Just a quick question, because mine too cut out, and I don't remember if, are there costs for these permits?
I believe the ordinance calls for us to set a permit fee for the building
For
permit,
you to do or for us to do?
for us to do it. The inspectional services.
So, but that's going to be at your discretion, that you're going to decide how much it's going to go? I mean, like, if somebody has a, because I think we said something around less than 20 feet somewhere, I remember from our discussion that would be fine. But anything above,
Building shall affix
I don't have that, so.
I mean, yes.
Yes, through the chair, council, yes. It says on the bottom, the building department shall fix fees for the initial permit and permit extension, and shall assign a fee per unit for commercial industrial zones.
Okay. For commercial in industrial zones.
What's the $200?
But what about the residential?
All right, so the ordinance gives him.
'Cause again, the only reason why we're here, because this thing would have passed a long time ago, the only reason why we're here is that we wanted to put language there to kind of take care of our neighborhoods, in the residential areas. So the residential units are not being assessed a fee for a permit?
Council, through the chair, I mean, the initial and renewal permit fee are to be set by our office. And then for commercial industrial zones, there's an additional fee per unit. Since there's only a 30-day or 45-day window for the residential zone, the initial permit fee would cover those up to 3.
Commercial is where we went per unit, and the residential would.
Do you have a question, Councilor Rodriguez?
Well, my question is that, whether or not we're going to assess some sort of a fee for residential permits.
Yes, Councilor, through the chair. That is it's on the bottom, which was cut off on a lot of the pages that you have, but it says a fee shall be, and this is for both residential, commercial, and industrial zones. A fee shall be set for the permit and renewal, and then for industrial and commercial zones, a per unit fee.
Yeah, my copy says something different, so.
Chair, may I
It
have my
just
approach?
says- Yes. I think it just says commercial and industrial zones. It's right there.
Madam, point of inquiry?
Councilor Lally?
Can we ask our legislative counsel what the most officialist version of it says?
Attorney Resnick?
Yeah, so it says that the fees for the initial permit are fixed by the building department. The thought was, when we were doing this, the reason why there is a per-unit fee for commercial and industrial zones is because those are allowed to stay for a year. So the thought was that the cost of the permit for a residential zone, since it's now limited to 75 days, was sufficient for the use on the residential property. You could change it, if you don't agree with that, to say that in addition to the permit fee, there needs to be a per-unit fee for residential, commercial, industrial zones.
So, Commissioner, what is the average fee? What do you think an average fee would be for residential and commercial?
I'll just, Madam Chair, right now, our minimum permit fees are $75 for a building permit. And our permits are averaging probably about $200 to $250 for most construction projects, windows, roofs and all that. I would say a $200 permit fee for that would be appropriate.
What do you think, Councilor Reddy?
Madam Chair.
I think that's a good idea. Councilor D'Agostino.
I just wanted to add in, I think, I was thinking about why we didn't put a fee structure in here. I think we started to, and then we realized that as time goes on, if we need to increase the fee, which obviously, $75 isn't going to be the same amount of money in 10 years. Now it's got to come back through an ordinance process versus it's much cleaner if he can just increase the fee.
That makes sense. Councilors? Councilor Rodriguez, since you had a question on that.
No, because I thought we were discussing, when we first talked about this, that we would exempt a storage unit of 20 feet or less in the backyard, because I think I was even making fun of my wife with her storage container. But I guess it seems that we're not exempting any storage.
I was going to say something funny, Counselor.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we were making fun of your wife.
I think I was. Did we not talk about that? That it would be just one?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Councilor Fowler.
Why don't we just simply add in there, and he'll file annually with the council the fee structure? And we can take a look at it. If it's
How do you feel
something
about
that,
that?
if it's something that we don't, if we
Yeah,
think
just to let us
he's
know where it
lost his
is.
mind, we'll tell him, that's all. But I really think we need to charge a fee for residential simply because we have costs related to the inspection and issuing the permit, et cetera, But I think the more discretion we give to the department heads, keep us as politicians out of it, subject to knowing what they're doing, I think the better off we'll be. So I would move to simply add in a sentence, the fee structure shall be filed annually with the city council.
A motion's been made,
Second?
properly seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carries. Attorney Resnick, did you get that, or?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. How's it sound?
Mr. Plouffe, there is no salary increase for these added duties now, I want you to know.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Deputy Chief.
just as some housekeeping, we did this so long ago that it says building department, and you may want to consider changing it to the inspectional services
Sexual
department.
Services. Can we do that? Do we need a motion?
You can make a motion, and I'll change it.
Madam Chair? I'd
Councilor
make the motion to change building department to inspectional services department in all relevant places.
Okay.
Second.
A motion was made and properly seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Councilor Lally?
Before we actually vote on this item in its entirety, I would just ask, we threw around a lot of amendments and a lot of suggestions. Do we have any amendments or anything that we wanted to pursue that we actually haven't voted on?
Yeah, you have not voted on the one about the storage container location for commercial zone. We talked about it, but there was no vote on it, that it's going to meet the setbacks and the rear setbacks for rear and sides, the frontage language carryover from the residential zones, plus adding the discretion of the commissioner.
Okay, so the form of a motion?
Before we actually,
Okay.
Counselor, you have-
Yes, Councilor Rodriguez.
No, I think it should be done the exact the same way.
Yep.
That,
I just need a motion on it.
Just, yes.
Yeah,
before we motion, Madam Chair,
Councilor Long?
I believe the commissioner said that setbacks don't
Zone,
really
correct.
apply to commercial property, so is there some sort of reasonable comparison or something we can cross that to in the language, or are we just going to have to be pretty blunt about it?
Council, through the chair, I don't believe there's anything that's, if you use the example of the Stop and Shop, it's not going to be easy to delineate that, but maybe something sort of screened from view from the street.
So screened from view unless they really don't have that ability, which then they would go to you and at your discretion, they would put it in front of the building.
That's what I would suggest, and I think we could mirror similar language to
Yeah,
the
it's same-
dumpsters.
Same intent, but we can't use the same language as the residential.
Council, even though there's no setbacks indicated, using the front plane of the building would in fact keep it behind the building or on the side of the building, I would think.
Just
All
wanted to
right.
make sure that was
Sure.
cleared up.
Thank you. So do we have a motion, councilors, to,
Well, I'd want to hear the language.
Attorney Resnick mentioned it. Councilor Castro.
Thank you for recognizing me. Before you vote on that, we started talking at one point about number 1 residential zones A, whether three storage containers was excessive, the number 3. And so I wanted to bring that to your attention. Maybe you might want to desire to reduce that to 2 or to 1, I don't know.
we would
What's
exempt
the will of
one.
the committee? I know you brought that up, Council.
Did,
Oh, my goodness.
again, I think it should be 1, but on the other hand, if sufficient facts were presented and the building commissioner decided that 2, because of the size of the house, maybe there was a catastrophic fire or something, that 2 was necessary, I don't want to tie his hands, so. So 1 is permitted, 2 is discretionary. Would that be acceptable?
However you want to do it.
Okay.
What do you think?
So the chair, as long as we're not, I would, I can take that discretion and use that wisely, as long as we're not hurting anyone that has a oversized house, or if there might be multiple units in a dwelling that needs to be stored.
Then perhaps it should say the permit shall allow for 1 storage container. More than 1 container shall be at the discretion of the building superintendent.
I believe that would work for multi-family units, yes.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
No, so that means we're not exempting, no.
I'm sorry?
Councilor Rodriguez had a question.
Oh, I don't know if I have a
The motion was
question.
made, though, but it hasn't been seconded yet.
So did
Oh,
we,
it's been seconded.
did
So
we?
on the motion,
On the
Counselor.
motion, so did we decide it on the size of these containers, whether or not there would be, because we had talked about the last time that we met, that anything up to what a shed would be
It's in there.
would be exempt from this?
It's item E.
It's in there.
It's in there.
It's in there?
It's in item E, yeah. Nothing greater than 20 feet long, wider than 9 feet, or higher than 9 feet. So 20 by 9 by 9.
This doesn't matter. No, Council, I was talking about as far as the exemption is concerned, that anything that was the size of a permitless shed would be allowed to, 1 would be allowed to be in the property. So as long as it's, out in the back, away from sight. We had talked about this the last time that we met. I know I got this head cold, so I think I'm coming in and out of the reality of things here, but I think we had talked about that, because I remember bringing up my wife again, that she has a small storage trailer in the back that she keeps certain things in it. And somehow it was said that as long as it's smaller than a certain size, that would be allowed to be in the backyard.
Through the chair.
Counselor Lally?
I believe that that discussion happened. I believe it was in context of what would actually be allowed on the property. It came up, I think, in context, we were discussing like the big 18-wheeler trailers.
Correct.
So I don't think there was like a permit exemption. Like a fee exemption, if that's what you meant.
No, not fee exemption, but just the permit.
There was something where there was some kind of allowance to it, but I believe that is Section E, as Councilor Farwell described.
I'm moving in with you next week.
Me?
Through the chair, Madam, I address that. I believe we're talking about temporary structures for 45 days with the possibility of 30 days more. We're not talking about permanent structures or structures that would be there for more than that period of time. If they were to be there for more than that time, I would suggest that they can be considered an accessory structure in accordance with the regular part of the zone. So if you wanted to have 2 accessory structures on your residential house, you can have them, and that would be counted as one, as long as it met all the requirements of the accessory structure.
All right.
Accessory structures don't have any aesthetics to them. You don't have to have an A-frame roof. You don't have to have, a special door or anything like that. So a container like that could be considered an accessory structure for a
So
period
as
of
long
time.
as it's a certain size, that it's not beyond the sizes of what's allowed.
That's correct. The accessory structure does not need a permit under 200 square feet, but it has to be used for accessory uses to the main structure. So you can't use it for a wood shop, for your commercial business or anything like that. It has to be storage of goods for your house. So,
That works, Counselor? Okay. So we're waiting, there was a motion, it was properly seconded for an amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? The amendment carries.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make the remaining, the motion to adopt the remaining amendment about the commercial space.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
Motion was made and properly seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Anything else to add, gentlemen, or is there anybody else that would like to speak on this matter? No, Deputy Chief, you're good with this? Commissioner?
all set, thank you.
Councilors? Okay. So once again, as with all ordinances, we'll see how this works, and if there's ever an issue, we know we can always bring it back and take a look at it, but I think this is really a good start, so thank you for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll vote on
As amended.
the ordinance as amended. All those in favor?
I need a motion to recommend favorable as amended.
Motion to recommend favorably as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Do you need some time, Attorney Resnick? No? Item number 2.
Ordinance, an ordinance to establish regulations for pedestrian use of and entry into certain public roadways in the city of Brockton. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Counselor. Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or Designee of Law Department. Brenda Perez, Chief of Brockton Police or Designee.
Good evening, thank you. We actually have Stacy Verdi from the Assistant City Solicitor. She's our Assistant City Solicitor this evening. Attorney Bridges couldn't be here. And we also, I see Captain Picaro, who's here with Chief Perez. So good evening, everybody. Good evening, Councilor Thompson.
Good evening, councilors. So today before us is a roadway safety ordinance in consultation with the Law Department and Legislative Council and the Brockton Police Department. We've identified certain streets in the city of Brockton that have that we're looking to provide increased enforcement of our public safety laws due to the data telling us that these streets have higher levels of pedestrian car involvement. And so the streets listed, and we got this data essentially through 3 years of police reports from these streets. And again, the data tells us that these streets have a higher level of pedestrian issues. And so think of this as a jaywalking statute, right? So our current statutory jaywalking statute established through the state is a $1 fine, essentially, for jaywalking. And so what we want to do is do more targeted enforcement on the areas that have a higher incident of pedestrian issues, and then also increase the deterrence factor by raising the level of fine from the $1 statutory fine up to, as it states, $50 first offense, $100 for a second offense, and a $300 for a third and subsequent offenses. Again, we're looking to improve roadway safety in Brockton, and we believe that this ordinance will accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselors, do you have questions? Counselor Lally?
Thank you, Counselor. Madam Chair. Good evening, Counselor.
Good evening.
So this is basically attempting to address the jaywalking that we've got. And would this covers the whole city, though?
No, this won't cover the whole city,
Sorry.
right? So
Yeah.
we currently have a statute from the state, right? So a state-level statute that covers jaywalking citywide. What we have determined that there are certain streets in Brockton that we're experiencing a higher level of pedestrian accidents and stuff to that effect. So what this ordinance is doing is targeting those specific streets so that we can increase enforcement and increase deterrence by increasing the fines if you are, in layman's terms, jaywalking.
How easy or difficult would it be to add or remove streets from this list?
I think if we find streets that the data shows us that there is an increase, a higher level of pedestrian accidents, then we'd be more than willing to expand the streets on this list. But we're starting with these ones because this is what we see at this time.
Right, that's what the data says.
Correct.
Yeah. I just am wondering about the mechanism. Like, would we submit them to the Traffic Commission or something like that?
Well, I think if maybe say by reference, if anybody said, hey, look, we're noticing some issues on this street, let's take a look. And if it rises to the level of, an increased incident level, then we can just, through an amendment to this ordinance, add that street. But
So
this is,
bring it back through ordinance.
Right, but this is more, we're trying to stay focused, right? If it's every street, then
It's too much.
enforcement gets spread out a little too far. And so what we're trying to do is apply our limited resources to the most highly, the streets with the highest incidences. And so that's what this ordinance is trying to accomplish.
All right, I think that's, for now, that's what I got. Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Counselor Fowler?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I think this is excellent. I do have a question probably for the Law Department or Legislative Council. The violation would be non-criminal, I take it, and the Police Department would issue an offender some type of a notice that we would put together and have printed, am I right?
We have Assistant City Solicitor Verdi. Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. Yes, it would be civilly enforced, civil
Okay.
fines.
And so if someone would appeal it to our hearings officer, is that what?
It would actually have to go through the court. It would be the district court appeal process,
Okay,
similar to what happens now with the ordinance violations.
okay, so it's non-criminal, like a non-criminal motor vehicle violation?
Correct.
Okay, and then the last question is, any comment from the police chief or Captain Picaro as to application of this and, their thoughts on it?
Thank you, Counselor. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, councilors. So I fully support this proposed ordinance aimed at addressing safety concerns related to the high instances of pedestrian accidents on the listed streets. Implementing such measures is a crucial step towards ensuring the well-being of our community members and enhancing the overall public safety. It's essential to prioritize the safety of both pedestrians and our motorists. And I believe this ordinance is a positive step and necessary initiative in achieving that. I'm going to let Captain Picaro speak on the implementation portion.
Thank you. Good evening, Captain.
Councilors, how you doing? I read this proposal. It's a good proposal. I think it lets the people know that we already take pedestrian safety seriously, but it's one more tool. It lets them know that we take it that much more seriously. Like the council had said, we've identified problem areas where we've had issues. We'll be able to focus our attention and resources into these areas and hopefully make a difference. Hopefully increase pedestrian and walker safety.
Thank you. So I have a question. How, as far as enforcement goes, so that obviously this isn't going to be somebody calling the police department saying there's somebody in this jaywalking. So this is going to be if a police officer is out on patrol and actually sees somebody, kind of walking in the street. Is that how it's going to be enforced?
My guess is probably a little bit of both. Like any law or ordinance, a citizen may see a violation and call it into us, or the officer on patrol may witness it, him or herself, and take action.
So residents, if they see somebody, they can call the police department?
Certainly,
and
sure.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Councilors, any questions? Or Councilor Rodriguez?
I'd like to actually add a couple streets to it. I think Court Street should be one of those streets that should be added to it. I believe Forest Ave and the fact that we have a high school with a bunch of kids walking from the high school onto Warren Ave and some of the other side streets that come along from Forest Ave and Richmond Street, off of Battles.
Right.
Or either Battles or Richmond Street, one of those streets. And we've actually had some incidences of kids being killed in that street. So I don't know why that's not on on any of the reports. But I think those three streets, I think, are, they should be added to that list. Only because, Forest for sure because of the high school, Court because it links up with, it begins where Pleasant ends. And technically, it goes down, towards the station and towards the BAT in those areas down there. So I think those three streets should be added to this.
Okay, is that in the form of a motion?
Yes, it is.
On the motion?
Has
I'll
it been
second it, by
seconded?
the way.
Motion's been made and probably seconded. Councilor Lally?
On the motion, Counselor, would you consider withdrawing your motion and then re-adding it with North Quincy Street attached to the rest of these streets? We've had a series of incidents on North Quincy, and the Traffic Commission's making, the appropriate adjustments to the street, but still, I think we've got a couple of points in favor of that kind of effort.
I'd like to withdraw my motion if
And
you
I'll
second
withdraw the
that.
second.
Motion's been
And
withdrawn.
then I'll remake the motion adding North Quincy Street to it.
Thank you, Counselor.
Before we do that, any
I'll
other
second.
suggestions, councilors? Councilor Thompson or
Yeah,
Captain?
so I'm not opposed to adding, right? But the thing is, I want to make sure this is data-driven. Is there any way that potentially, I think we said that through our research, we found that Court Street was a street, and then we can definitely add. Would it please the committee that if we could implement it with adding Court Street, because that was one of our streets that we discussed, and I'm glad you brought it up because I forgot to mention it. But on Forest or Richmond, if potentially we could maybe check the data to see if that is a high traffic, or a street that has a high level of pedestrian accidents. If so, we can add it maybe next legislative session, first thing. But I wanted to keep this data focused, and so I'm not sure if they meet the requirements, but we can always add them at some point.
Councilor, I think we ought to look at it on near misses as well. I mean, I've driven on Forest Ave at odd hours when the kids are going to school and coming home from school, and they're weaving in and out of traffic in the sense, and they might not be in the stats of where somebody has been killed in the streets, but there's a need to put something in there to know that there's this street that actually leads, it's the entrance to the biggest high school on the, we're taking care of Beaumont Street, and I think it makes sense for us to put that on the southern part of the high school as well, just to make sure that if the message is that we're going to send this out, that we're taking this seriously, I think that's an important concept that we include some of these streets. We're not asking these officers to go around and stand at these street corners, but the fact that they were included, whether or not they're on the data that you have, but I'm talking about the near misses that we have that never make it to any sort of statistics, and then we don't have to come back by adding these main stretches of our city as we come back, as we move forward with this stuff, because I don't think too many people actually have been hit on School Street, the little side street down here, but it's on the list. And when we don't include our high school road onto this thing, I don't think it sends that message that we need to do that.
I would have no objection. My research didn't include Forest, but if this body feels like that Forest should be a street that we add to this,
it sends a nice message, I think, to the community.
Then I'm fine with that, and I believe a motion's on the.
No, we haven't, it hasn't been made, but I also would like to see some of this data. No, you didn't.
It was remade and I seconded it.
Okay, to add these four streets? Okay.
I do have something on the motion, though.
Okay, Councilor Lally on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor, I understand and I agree with the drive to keep this statistics-based, impartial, go where things are. I also understand Councilor Rodriguez's, whole point about we want to keep things from becoming a statistic. We want to keep things out of statistics. So, where we know there to be an issue that hasn't, been inflamed yet, but we can see it, that is, part of what the legislative body's job is, to call that kind of thing out. But I understand trying to, match that with the objectivity of going where there is a need. So my question would really be, and it's, if you don't have it off the top of your head, that's fine, but the statistics, the actual mechanics for what put these streets on this list, what would that be?
So I will send that out to you, to this body.
Thank you, yeah.
The committee, please, if you could send it to
Yeah, just like how many incidents, warranted?
I have that information.
Yeah, well, right,
Share it
so
with us.
we'll share it.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
So there's a motion, it was on the floor and properly seconded. All those in favor of the amendment of adding the streets?
Before you go, I want to
Councilor
make sure
Rodriguez.
that it's Richmond Street / Battle Street,
Battle Street.
because they kind
It
of
was on there.
converge.
Legislative, so she's recorded that, so yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So all those in favor? All those opposed? The amendment carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. We still need a motion for
Motion to recommend favorably,
as amended.
as amended.
Second.
Motion's been made and properly seconded to accept this ordinance as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Councilor,
councilors. Appreciate your
Captain,
efforts
Chief.
here.
And our Assistant City Solicitor. Thank you.
Item number 3, ordinance. An ordinance creating a revolving fund pursuant to MGL Chapter 44, Section 53.5, to be titled the Economic Revolving Fund for the purpose of support economic development and planning projects in the city of Brockton. Expenditures of said fund shall be made on the authority and direction of the Chief Financial Officer. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Councilor, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development.
So councilors, Mr. Clarkson isn't here this evening, but Ms. Tiffany Castrullo is here. She's been here all evening. And Mr. May is, I believe, out of the country, so.
Yes. So,
Councilor Thompson.
thank you, and good evening again. So, I'm going to have Tiffany speak a little more deeper on the mechanics of this, but essentially, it's my understanding that the city is trying to develop a policy of reducing the need to encumber funds, and due to the nature of the Economic and Planning Department, because of long-term plannings that they have, then a revolving fund would be fund set up so that I believe what we're finding, and again, Tiff can speak better to this, but that as the fiscal year rolls over, we're finding that funds that are related to economic development, our DIF funds, are being rolled into free cash because they're not encumbered, because the bills are coming due later than the understanding of what to encumber. So this is kind of a financial housekeeping issue, so that monies that are used for financial planning is not, economic planning is not being at the end of the fiscal year being rolled over into free cash. And then now Mr. May has to come back after it's certified to retrieve those funds. That's my understanding of this, but if Tiff wanted to add more to that, please do.
Thank you, Councilor.
Good evening, councilors. Councilor Thompson, pretty much nailed it. That is pretty much what we're trying to do. We're trying to get departments away from encumbering funds. And creating this economic development revolving fund will help the planning department with all of the upcoming projects that are going to be happening downtown. And what would happen is the planner would take his DIF funds that are in the general fund and then come to you for a transfer either throughout the fiscal year, or, towards the end of the fiscal year before you submit, before we submit the next fiscal year's budget, and transfer those funds into this revolving fund. So he has the ability to pay those bills when they come in, to those contractors, to those vendors. I know there could possibly be concerns about having it under the direction of the CFO. That's really just a checks and balance, just so we can keep an eye on it, just to make sure that the funds are there, and we're just reviewing it on a timely manner.
Thank you. Councilor Lally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just establishing this is for the DIF money,
Yes.
and that's it.
For now, yes, and if there are any projects that do come about, if there are any fees associated, excuse me, if there are any fees associated with applications, or some things that, contractors or vendors might have to pay for the planning department related to a DIF project, that would go into this fund as well.
Okay, so it's DIF and things.
It's DIF-related items, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, that was the big, I just wanted to make sure that we, to clarify what exactly would be going into it.
Yep.
And revolving funds are still a part of the budget. We still see those, so.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Fair enough. That was my biggest question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand where the Finance Department is coming from with not encumbering funds. But frankly, folks, I was shocked to see this come in. There's nothing wrong with free cash. As a matter of fact, having a robust free cash balance is probably what's going to bail us out of the school deficit issue. In my mayoral days, and I can remember back that far, this would basically be a $500,000 slush fund. You'd put $500,000 worth of fees into a revolving account. The planning and development director would decide, well, I think I'll spend $100,000 here, I think I'll spend $35,000 there, I think I'll spend $250,000 here. And as long as the balance, as long as the fund had the balance, that would be perfectly legal, and the CFO could say, okay, I'm going to do that. So, all the department heads could use $500,000 to play with. If I were going to do anything, I'd probably put $500,000 in a fund for school security and school programs and services. We're all getting hit with complaints about staffing and recruitment and cutbacks in programs and security issues at the high school. What better use would there be for $500,000 than for the schools? How about the police department? I'm sure the police chief could use $500,000 to increase traffic enforcement and accident prevention and pedestrian safety. Mr. Plouffe could use $500,000 for code enforcement and spot checks of businesses. Frankly, I just could not support this. I mean, I think we would look, if we were to approve this, what message would we be sending to residents? That our priorities are that we're going to give the Planning and Economic Development Director $500,000 to pretty much do with it as he sees fit? Or are we serious about school issues? Or are we serious about accidents and pedestrian safety, school safety, infrastructure? $500,000 might do a street. I mean, this is just, for me, this is beyond the pale. I'm just shocked that it came in with the confluence of all of the other issues that we're wrestling with in the city. And I think before we start throwing around $500,000 here and $250,000 there, Madam Chair, we need to wrap our heads around what is the school issue, what is the deficit, what are we going to owe, what is in the best financial interests of the city. And then if we wanted to do a smaller revolving fund, and we do have them for the building department, we have a building demolition fund, I could go with, $150,000 maybe to be able to act quickly on an economic development initiative, but not $500,000 and not right now. And that's the way I feel, folks. I figured I'd better be honest with you and just lay it all out there.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilor. Thank you. Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too have some serious concerns with this. I mean, the whole purpose of us being here is to provide checks and balances to the government. We're the purse holders of the residents and the citizens of this city. And I mean, Councilor Farwell is talking about $500,000. I'm actually looking at this. It says that the Chief Financial Officer provided no more than $500,000 can be expended within that fiscal year. There's no limits into how big this whole thing can grow. That's basically stating that you're not going to spend more than $500,000. So we're going to create this pot of money that basically has very little checks and balances. We have no idea who's going to get who, what, and where. But yet we're just going to give somebody, I mean, what's the purpose of this council? The fact that we have individuals who are, we discuss this all the time. Somebody comes in front of us to make a $300 payment of a bill that they got. And yet somehow we're going to hand over up to $500,000 in this fiscal year. It might grow to God knows what, because that's what revolving accounts do. There's no limits as to how big this can get. It could be in the millions of dollars, so as long as they don't spend $500,000. And basically that just says in FY24. Once the revolving account is established, what about in FY25, FY26? What happens to that? Is it just a revolving account for 1 year? And if that's the case, why do we need to have a revolving account if it's just for 1 year? If it's something that goes beyond that, then there's no limitations as to what this bank account can actually, I mean, we're afraid of putting the money into the general pot for the city, but yet we want to create a separate pot that very few people, according to this, I mean, I don't have an issue with our CFO, but according to this, a CFO is actually the decider whether or not these funds will be paid, not paid, and where's the accountability? Where's the purse holders to decide where $1 from the city is going to go? So that's why, I mean, I look at it, it looks good in theory, but it's not doing what it should be doing. It should have additional language to it. It should actually have some limitations on it. It should have more eyes looking at it, because we know what happened down the street. with the $14+ million, and God knows what else is out there because we don't have enough eyes to kind of look at things. And we're in the process of creating something that can grow into a little monster on its own that we have very little control over. And this is why I too would have a real problem passing this as it is. And I wish that Mr. Clarkson would be here just to ask him those things. I mean, who's going to decide? Is it going to be up to him? Whatever I want to, it looks okay, you got the money. It doesn't look good, I'm not going to give you the money. So what happened to the players who are supposed to be the deciders of what happens with the dollars and cents in this community? And that's why, frankly, to be honest with you, I haven't spoken with too many councilors that are too thrilled with this. I don't know exactly how everybody else feels on this particular thing. I know at least the two of us have spoken technically against it, but I honestly don't think this would actually fly because it leaves open way too many things. There's so many things up in the air that we're not exactly sure, once we open this Pandora box, how we're going to be able to close it again. So that's just my 2 cents. And I will not support this as is, unless we kind of work at this. Perhaps this thing belongs on that new committee that we created to hash out a way of kind of putting it together, how it would work. And frankly, in a way, I kind of almost feel dissed in the sense because we created a committee to help out this whole process that this thing should have gone to for us to kind of maybe kind of work on things. There's 5 of us on it. If you can get the 5 of us to buy into this thing, there's 5 votes in this body that you could do. And, the fact that it wasn't brought up there and then it was just kind of late file in a way and boom, here it is, decide on this because either you guys are for business or against business. That's not the way it is. My whole thing is the voters just spoke not too long ago to make us accountable to their dollars and cents, and that's what I intend to do, to be the person or one of the people that actually would make sure that their dollars and cents are being spent the right way. Not that this isn't going to be spent the right way, but right now I have some serious concern about this.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I can respond to some of Councilor Rodriguez's points. This is just like any other revolving fund that comes before you. It would be renewed every fiscal year. So it's not just for FY24 or just FY25. It's not just for the current fiscal year. It would be reestablished every year, like our demolition revolving fund or our vacant abandoned building, the cable Comcast revolving fund under the mayor's office, which has, all of those revolving funds have similar wording that the department may not expend up to a certain amount within that fiscal year without further approval of yourself, of the body. This certainly can be amended to take out the CFO or add, from the discretion of the mayor or what have you. We did add the chief financial officer in there for checks and balances reasons to make sure that there is a valid contract when the planning department is putting through a requisition in our financial system. To make sure that that contract is valid for that fiscal year, to make sure that they're not over the contract allotted amount. We check that in the auditing office, checks that as well. So that's where our checks and balances came in, thinking putting this revolving fund together for the planning department.
But through the chair, Tiff,
Councilor Rodriguez.
but Tiff, this is $500,000 that we're putting into this slush fund.
Well,
For somebody to use as they see fit. That's the problem that I'm having with it.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, if I may.
Thank you. Thank you for being here for our CFO. I know he said he couldn't be here, so thank you.
It's not a problem. I understand you may have an issue with the $500,000. Reduce it. Let's reduce it, and let's try it out for the first fiscal year and see how it plays out. I can tell you that I have met with Mr. May as well as with Troy and with the mayor to discuss this and to talk about his contractual, agreements that he has with the downtown area and the projects coming up and things like that. $500,000 probably would scare me as a Brockton resident as well, if I was not behind the scenes in a financial matter, especially with the situation with the school department. I can assure you this is not a slush fund, as you might think it may be. But if the $500,000 is what is really making you nervous, let's just reduce it. And then if Mr. May has an issue with that, then he can come back and he can amend that amount.
Councilor Rodriguez still has the
No,
floor.
I still,
so-
yeah, because it's not necessarily the $500,000. It's the checks and balances that go into play that I have a concern with,
Okay.
as well as the $500,000, which to me, I see it as a $500,000. But it's the checks and balances. I mean, somebody basically decides on their own, without an input from a body that actually has to go back and answer to the voters and the taxpayers of this community what we're doing. And it's like, I have no idea, because we have absolutely no say, at least the way it is now. If funds are needed to be paid out to a certain individual, it comes back here and you ask the body, and the body has the ability to say yay, nay, or at least, tell me how this is going to go, or who's getting benefited from this, because with this, we have absolutely no control over it. There's zero control of how $500,000 is going to be divvied up into this community without our knowledge. And we're asked to approve the budget. Next week, we're going to be talking about, oh, by the way, your taxes are going back up again. But yet, we just created a $500,000 fund that one or two people can decide how they're going to spend that, when we're supposed to be the holder of the purse.
All set, Councilor.
Yeah. Can I
His
just-
question was towards the finance.
No, it was a general
Okay.
comment to what she just said.
But
So you want to
I mean, and
respond to Councilor's?
So I'm not a financial expert. From my understanding of what this revolving fund is, we're not taking $5,000 out of the budget and creating this fund. This is already allocated funds that are allocated during budget time, that we have authority to say yes for this budget line. And then as that budget line is getting spent over the year, there's a point where potentially there's still money remaining in that line item that then potentially would be turned into free cash if it's not encumbered. And so there's an issue as to wanting to reduce the need to encumber, and then just put that money that we've already budgeted, allocated, discussed amongst ourselves, take that money, put it into this revolving fund, so that when that bill comes due in the next fiscal year, it can be taken out of that fund and paid that bill. This is, is that generally?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess I haven't paying attention. This is not taking $500,000 from the general fund, or we're not creating monies here. The monies that are in this fund are budgeted, allocated through the regular budgeting process, and then put kind of as a safety valve that it doesn't get turned into free cash because the next fiscal year has passed. So and I would imagine, like any other budgeted monies, that there are checks and balances, there's statutory requirements that need to be met for these monies to be spent. It seems like the act, from what I'm hearing, is $500,000 is going into this fund and Rob May gets to spend it how he pleases. I don't believe that is the case here. I'm sure Tiffany can definitely state that that's certainly not the case. But I just want to clear up that misunderstanding. This is not a $500,000 fund that's coming out of anywhere. Potentially, only maybe $50,000 goes in here. If that's what's left over from DIF funds after the fiscal year, with an expectation of that $50,000 being spent the following fiscal year, just so it doesn't go into free cash, it can remain in this fund and be paid out that bill at the next fiscal year. So we've done revolving funds in the past, but I'm not dying on this hill. So if we want to refer it over to,
Thank you, Council. I have a few
okay.
councilors that have questions.
But I just want to clarify that, I mean, the thought is here that this is some nefarious thing going on. You know, we got the professionals here that make sure that these monies aren't spent at the will of one man for any reason.
Thank you. Are you all set, Councilor Rodriguez?
No, actually, just one more thing. Just because we have professionals in the schools as well, and we know what that has done for us.
Stay out to the item that's before
I
us,
am, but you
please.
know what? My job here is to make sure that not a single dollar is spent the way it shouldn't be spent. First of all, I think there's a serious issue with departments looking to encumbered funds. You know, if you have a budget, a yearly budget that you're given some funds to spend to operate your department during the year, you spend those funds. And if you don't spend those funds, it ought to go back to the pot of money that we can use for whatever else the city needs to use it for. Because nobody has the right to those funds. Those funds belong to the city and to the taxpayers of this community. So we don't have, because now we're going to start this, and before, where does it end? Who's next? I think Council Farwell said, you know, the police department, the fire department, we're going to start doing this. Where does it end? Everybody would love to do that, just to save some money. I mean, hey, listen, let's not rush to do the job that we need to do, because we can just throw it into our fund. You know, my problem is, you've got a budget, spend it within that year. You didn't spend it, then you come back here again and you ask for additional fund for next year. You know, none of this savings account that you're going to save money because, well, if I don't rush to get this thing through, then I can wait and it'll just go into this kitty fund for us to use at a later date. You know, that's what I have a problem with. You know, and it doesn't matter what Council Thompson says. I am not going to change my mind on this. You know, I'm not going to support this. Others can. There's 11 of us on this board, you know, that 10 people can support it. I am not going to support it, you know, because I don't think it sets a bad precedent. When we start having these things for every single one, you know, we brought up the cable funds. Cable funds are funds that come in through Comcast on a yearly basis into a pot of money. It needed to be put somewhere. This doesn't have to happen. This gets decided on a budget on a yearly basis from funds that come out of the taxpayers of the city. It's not some grant that we're getting from the state. It's not some money that comes in from a vendor that's coming in to support this. So it's monies that belongs to the taxpayers. When it doesn't get spent, it goes back to the safe of the taxpayers for next year. And that's how I feel about it. And that's how I'm going to look at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All set, Councilor? Thank you. Councilor Lally and then Councilor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I was gonna make a joke. I'm not gonna make a joke.
No jokes.
No jokes. So basically, this is, you've got money in your budget, the fiscal year runs out, you want to put it in the revolving fund so you can use it next year, and you don't want to encumber it. Encumbering it would do the same, would put it in or make it available though, right?
If I may.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't want to encumber it. It's the fact that we can only encumber funds up to a certain point, which it has there's a date tied to that.
Right.
And there may be a bill that comes in beyond that date, right? So it could be, you know, it could be September, October, November, or what have you. This would allow the planning department to pay that bill with the funds that have already been appropriated by the body. Now, mind you, in order to put the funds into this revolving fund, the planner would have to come here to do that transfer. So
The planner would have to, in order to put the money in the revolving fund, the planner would have to come before us. But the, something that you said that I kind of want to, you know, dig a little on is, so this is, you know, if bills don't get paid or something like that, as it stands right now, if the money isn't spent, it'll, it doesn't just disappear, it goes into, free cash. And then so right now we have the fiscal 22 free cash. When fiscal 23 is certified, we'll have fiscal 23 free cash as fiscal 24 ends. So, and that's how that goes. So if a bill comes in late or something happens where we have to pay something that we have to use, old money for, a bill that, however it arrived before us, it has to be addressed. Right now, that has to come before the council. And so for the counselors, we're made aware that there's still things that have to be settled from the last fiscal year. The general public is made aware that there's something that needs to be settled from the last fiscal year. I don't want, especially with the way our counterparts down the way are handling things, I don't want to give the impression that our bill paying is going to be done in a way that's less televised. So I'll turn that over to you, to both of you.
No, we have nothing further. I mean, I say.
Thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, we have nothing further.
Do you have any other questions, Councilor Lally?
My only other question is at the beginning of this, Tiff, you mentioned that you were looking to do this with other departments? Or you mentioned that not in this exact sense, but you were looking to move away from encumbrances.
Yes.
And that's sort of a doctrine for the whole city?
Yes.
Okay. Would that be reflected in similar
Not in a revolving fund, no.
Okay.
No.
Just wanted to
Nope.
clear that up. And I understand you're leaving soon, so I do want to
Yes.
thank you for your service
you.
to the city. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Wanted to make sure I got that to you before you headed
She's
out.
not leaving yet. She still has till the end of the month.
Well, if this meeting keeps going, it will be the end of the month.
Come quick enough. I'm sure.
Yeah, that's all I've got, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Councilor Lally. Councilor Farwell.
Yeah, Tiffany, I just want to get a couple of more things on the record. You've been here 22 years,
Yes.
and I've been in elective office now 22 years. Do you know of another single department head in the history of this city that had $500,000 set aside for them to decide how to spend during the fiscal year without having to come back to the council and put in a request?
Counselor, I can't remember what I did yesterday. Never mind. You want me to go back 22 years?
Okay.
With all due respect.
Fair enough.
We'll research
Do you have other department heads that are asking for this same courtesy and accommodation?
Under asking specifically a question for me?
Yeah.
No, but I can't answer to
Okay.
anyone else.
And am I correct that if we did adopt this, receipts of payments of transfers and payments of fees for the purpose of supporting economic development planning projects would be credited to this economic development revolving fund as written now, it could be of any amount. You couldn't spend any more than $500,000 in a fiscal year. But in fact, the department head could say, you know what, I'm going to engage the Collins Institute for $300,000, and I'm going to go study this particular issue. That would never come back to us. He would have that flexibility, correct?
Depends on the case.
Well, no, legally. Legally, if this fund existed and the department head had the approval of the CFO, he could just decide, I'm going to spend $300,000 and I'm going to go study something, and we as counselors would never know it. Unless he chose to tell us.
Yeah, I can't answer to that.
Well, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
That's okay.
But the last thing I want to say is, we never had the problem with paying bills at the end of the fiscal year when I was in office, because Mr. Condon would tell every single department head, if you have outstanding invoices, you go to those vendors and you tell them to get those invoices in, because we have to close out the fiscal year, we have to pay that particular fiscal year's obligations out of that particular fiscal year's budget. So I'm not going to do it either, Councilor Rodriguez. I just think it's crazy.
Thank you, Counselor. Are you all set?
All set.
Okay. Well, I can't not put my 2 cents in. I think this is just late in the year, and there's no way I can support it the way it's written as well. So, but I do want to thank you for your 22 years of service. First, in the clerk's office, for all that you did for us, as I know when I was a new counselor, and then now you're leaving from the finance office. So we've seen you grow with the city, which is really great. So I wish you well.
Thank you.
Counselors, I'll entertain a motion, or Counselor, okay, you're not invited guests, but yeah, if you'd like to speak on the matter, Counselor Nicastro, and then Counselor D'Agostino.
I think Counselor Thompson alluded to this tonight in his presentation, and I'm personally aware of this. When the City Council approved the 40R designation for the land in Ward 4 on Thatcher Street, the state ponied up and paid us $200,000 for that. It was like an inducement for 40R projects. And at that time, when the money came in, I was on the council. And so I arranged to have the funds split. $100,000 would go to the use of the planning, for planning concerns. And the other $100,000 would be held back in an account with the city for mitigating issues that would arise as the project is developed. And I got it through the council, you might remember voting on it, and so my $100,000, well, I should say Ward 4's $100,000 has been held since then in an account administered by the Finance Department. But evidently, the planning director failed to encumber his funds or to do anything with it, and as a result, they fell into free cash and he lost the use of it. And so earlier this year, it came up that he wanted to use those funds for a planning-related endeavor, and he didn't have access to them. And so we had to go through some orders to pull that money out of free cash and appropriate it for his use. And I think that's probably and I was told at that time, someone in the finance department told me that this has happened before with the planning department. I think establishing this revolving fund would keep that from happening again, I suppose. But at the same time, isn't it just a bit of bookkeeping? And aren't these numbers worth tracking, right? And so when this comes back to us, I don't support this. I think it's tone deaf, especially in light of our public school financial issues. And I think better bookkeeping is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor D'Agostino, this is what's before us. You're going to speak on this ordinance?
Yeah, what else would I speak on?
I'm not sure, just making sure,
You worried I was going to sing the national anthem for us? All right. So a lot of what I was going to say has already been said by all of you, which I was obviously glad to hear. So I'll try and be quick. Again, I would not, when this comes in front of the full council, I certainly would not vote for it. In light of what happened on the school department, the taxpayers are looking for greater controls from their elected officials, greater scrutiny of finances from all of us. They're certainly not looking for us to bring the school committee in just a few weeks ago, chastise them for not keeping a better eye on the money.
Counselor, let's get back to the...
And then turn around and, it is relevant. And then turn around and do something very similar. Mm-hmm. That's what this would be to me. And I don't think I've said anything inappropriate, with due respect, Madam Chair. Anyway, I just think that this is a terrible idea. Our job is to watch the money as a council, and we have a process for this, as has been said. You come in, you put the bills in front of us that need to be paid, and we approved them, and yeah, you have to answer some questions about why this wasn't already done. Why is this now coming after the fact? Well, that's what's supposed to happen. That's the process. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor D'Agostino. Anybody else would like to speak on this matter, and we'll entertain a motion?
I'm going to make a motion to recommend favorably in the hope it does not prevail.
Second.
Basically, I'm making a motion, an
No, I
affirmative motion.
understand your
Procedural
motion.
motion.
I understand your motion.
If that succeeds, we would report it back unfavorably.
Right.
Yes.
You don't want to do the,
No, I
okay.
just did this, I just did a second.
All right.
That's fine.
Motion's been made. I'm sorry?
Just table it?
There's a motion on the floor.
I'd be okay tabling.
I don't care, yeah.
No, what was the other? Okay.
I'll withdraw my motion as stated and substitute a motion to table.
Second.
Motion's been made to table, properly seconded. All those in favor of tabling? All those opposed? The ordinance is tabled.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Honestly, can the ordinance...
Is there a second?
You wouldn't be anxious to get out of here, would you, Counselor?
An ordinance.
Second on the motion?
No, Can we table
We just
something
did.
on ordinance?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've done
it's
a couple
committee.
of this, we've done a couple of
Robert's
this.
rules applies.
Yes.
It's a committee. I
Okay,
don't know if we
there's
can
a
actually do
motion
that.
on the floor to adjourn.
I'll
I didn't-
second that.
And properly seconded. All those in favor of adjourning? All those opposed? We are adjourned. And thank you to our clerk, Attorney Resnick.
You 100% correct.